Welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah, really looking forward to getting into this one today.
We are jumping straight into a topic today that, well, it touches every single person listening at some point,
Absolutely.
though it really rarely gets the kind of surgical attention it deserves. We are looking at the psychological shift, the fundamental rewiring of your mind that happens when you lose the people who anchor you in the world.
And to be clear, right up front, we aren't just talking about losing a casual acquaintance here.
Right. No.
We are talking about the loss of a primary benefactor.
Yes. A parent, a lifelong mentor, maybe a visionary teacher.
Or a leader who essentially helped build the person you are today.
Exactly. The core question is what actually happens to your sense of identity when that foundational figure is suddenly just gone?
It's a profound shift to navigate.
Yeah.
And if you are listening to this right now, you have likely experienced the specific disorientation of this kind of loss.
Or you inevitably will.
Right. Simply because it is a core part of the human condition.
Yeah.
We often categorize these mentor figures under the broad umbrella of, important relationships.
Sure.
But psychologically, they function as something much more structural. They are ideological and emotional pillars.
Pillars. Yeah, that's the perfect word for it.
They literally hold up your understanding of the world. They give you the framework for how you measure right and wrong and how you locate your own place within society.
So when a figure like that is removed from your life, your internal architecture doesn't just feel sad.
Yeah,
It actively destabilizes.
exactly.
Which brings us to our source material for today, because we want to really understand the mechanics of that destabilization.
Yeah, the source for this is fascinating.
It really is. We are looking at a piece titled When Benefactors Leave, Human Psychology, Trauma, and New Responsibility. And it's written by Mohammed Farouk Rashid.
He's a columnist, an AI advocate, and a really dedicated student of human psychology.
So our mission for this deep dive is to trace the anatomy of this specific grief. We want to understand why losing a benefactor can completely fracture your worldview.
And then, crucially, explore how a person can take that existential shock
Right.
and forge it into a new, incredibly resilient sense of purpose.
Okay, let's unpack this. The author makes a point early on that we really need to separate the emotion of sadness from the cognitive reality of a structural collapse.
Yeah, and that distinction is the linchpin for understanding everything that follows. I mean, sadness is a natural emotional response to absence. We all get that.
Of course.
But what we are analyzing here is a disruption in your brain's cognitive mapping.
Cognitive mapping. Break that down for us a bit.
Well, throughout our lives, we organically designate certain individuals as our ultimate guides. We rely on them to be strong, consistent, capable of navigating the chaos of life.
Yeah, we lean on them.
Exactly. And over time, your brain actually creates cognitive shortcuts based on these people.
I see.
When faced with a dilemma, you might subconsciously ask yourself, what would my mentor do? Or what would my father say?
Right. Their worldview basically becomes intertwined with your own cognitive framework.
Precisely.
So think about what happens when you see that invincible figure suddenly weaken, or maybe you face a public disgrace or pass away. It goes way beyond mourning.
It triggers a severe mental shock.
Because that cognitive shortcut you relied on for years suddenly leads to a dead end. Your brain reaches for the compass, and the compass is just gone.
And what's fascinating here is that clinical psychology categorizes this experience as an existential crisis.
That sounds intense.
It is. To put a physical sensation to it, imagine the feeling of vertigo.
Okay.
You are walking down a set of stairs in the dark. You think there's one more step. You put your weight down and
And there's nothing there.
nothing there. That sudden visceral jolt, that free fall, that is the psychological equivalent of losing a foundational benefactor. The external anchor you use to regulate your internal world has just vanished. It forces your mind into a state of acute disorientation.
And in that disorientation, the mind obviously scrambles to find its footing, which forces some incredibly heavy questions to the surface.
Massive question.
The text outlines 3 specific ones that emerge during this shock. First, who am I? Second, what is the purpose of life? And third, is everything temporary and meaningless? I really want to linger on that first one, because losing someone else logically shouldn't make you forget who you are, but it does.
It does, because identity is largely relational.
Right.
We define ourselves in relation to others. If a massive part of your identity is tied up in being, say, this person's star pupil, or this leader's trusted deputy.
Or this parent's child.
Exactly. Their absence leaves a functional vacuum. You are left asking, who am I, when the primary person who perceived me and validated my progress is no longer here to witness it?
That is a heavy realization.
And how a person processes that vacuum, how they answer those three questions in the wake of the shock, that dictates the entire trajectory of their life.
It's a literal fork in the road.
It really is. One path leads toward a profound intellectual and emotional evolution, and the other, well, it leads toward a very dark, cynical stagnation.
It might be helpful to use a visual here for that darker path, just to make it concrete for you listening. Imagine you are living in a house and someone comes in and just removes a load-bearing wall.
The whole structure groans.
Right, the floors warp and suddenly you feel this intense insecurity about the entire building. You literally don't trust the roof over your head anymore.
And our minds operate under the illusion that our benefactors will always be there to hold up the ceiling.
We take it for granted.
Always. So when they are gone, that sudden insecurity can very easily breed fear.
And fear is an uncomfortable state to maintain, right?
Extremely. So the human mind often converts it into anger, which brings us to the first stage of the darker trajectory. The author details.
The phase of rebellion and denial.
Yes. Driven by the sheer chaos of grief, a really common psychological defense mechanism is to aggressively reject all the surrounding structures.
Rejecting everything.
A subconscious logic is totally protective. It goes something like, if the system I believed in couldn't protect the person I admired, or if the universe is cruel enough to let this invincible guy die, then the system and the universe are entirely flawed.
And that plays out in such recognizable ways.
Oh, absolutely.
You see people going through this trauma who suddenly turn their backs on the traditions they were raised in, or they just drop out of communities they used to lead.
They push away any form of authority.
Because any structure reminds them of the structure that just collapsed. It is a defense mechanism to prevent being hurt by a system again.
But that rejection is just a stepping stone to a much more dangerous philosophical endpoint.
Right, which the text identifies as nihilism.
Yeah, because rebellion still implies you care enough to fight back against something. Nihilism is the cessation of caring altogether.
The thought process cascades so rapidly.
It becomes, if this incredible person, who commanded so much respect and did so much good, can just vanish or be broken by the world, then what is the point of any of this?
It is the ultimate cynical conclusion. It frames all human effort as basically useless because the end result is always decay.
Exactly. If the best among us are temporary, why bother building a legacy? Why bother striving for principles?
You can easily see how a person could get completely trapped in that mental state. It feels realistic to them in the moment, even though it's actually just unmanaged trauma.
And nihilism is highly seductive during grief.
Seductive? How so?
Because it offers a perverse kind of anesthesia. If nothing matters, then the agonizing pain of your loss doesn't matter either. It neutralizes the sting. But the cost is complete paralysis.
Right. It prevents you from ever participating in life again.
Which is what makes the alternative path outlined in our source material so crucial to dissect.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because while that descent into nihilism is a very common human reaction, the text pivots here to explore a different psychological phenomenon entirely.
A much more hopeful one.
We are not just fragile creatures waiting to be broken by grief. Human psychology has this remarkable capacity to use trauma as a catalyst.
The clinical term for this is post-traumatic growth.
We hear a lot about post-traumatic stress.
We do, but we rarely discuss the profound development that can occur on the other side of a shattering event.
So how does that work in this context?
The core principle here is that the removal of that foundational anchor doesn't have to result in a permanent collapse. For some individuals, the shock triggers a radical shift in perspective.
A shift away from the despair.
Right. Instead of the narrative being, my guide is gone, therefore I am lost, the narrative becomes, my guide is gone, which means the responsibility now falls to me.
The responsibility now falls to me. That completely changes the framing from passive victimhood to active agency. But, it is one thing to say that in theory, and it's entirely different to actually execute that pivot when you are in the depths of an existential crisis. How does someone realistically make that leap?
Well, the author provides a brilliant historical blueprint to illustrate exactly how this pivot works. And not just for an individual, but on a massive societal scale.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The text examines the historical moment when Prophet Muhammad passed away. Now, you have to understand the context here to see the psychology at play.
Right.
You had an entire community of companions and followers who had entirely recentered their spiritual, legal, and social reality around his presence.
He was the ultimate benefactor for that society.
The ultimate anchor. So when he died, it wasn't just a personal loss for those followers, it was a collective existential crisis.
The entire society was staring down that exact threat of rebellion and nihilism we just discussed.
Yes, the structure could have easily collapsed under the weight of that disorientation.
It could have, and that is where a pivotal intervention occurred.
A masterclass in crisis management.
Abu Bakr, a close companion and a senior figure, stepped forward while the community was in complete shock, and he delivered a statement that essentially acted as a psychological tourniquet.
Let me give you the quote. He said, "Whoever worship Muhammad, let them know that Muhammad has died, and whoever worships Allah, he is ever living."
The directness of that is staggering. I mean, there is no softening of the blow there.
Not at all.
It forces the listener to confront the painful reality head-on. The physical person is gone, but then it immediately redirects their attention toward the eternal.
And that redirection is the essence of post-traumatic growth. The core lesson the author extracts from this event is the vital distinction between mortal personalities and immortal principles.
That's the key right there.
Abu Bakr expertly shifted the community's foundational anchor. If your entire worldview is tied exclusively to the physical presence of a mentor, their inevitable death leaves a vacuum that will just consume you.
Because they are human, they will pass.
Exactly. But if you untangle the person from the message, if you tie yourself to the principles they embodied, then their departure is no longer a void.
It transitions from a loss into a passing of the baton.
Yes.
The mission didn't vanish with the mentor. The jurisdiction over the mission just changed hands.
It cures the feeling of meaninglessness.
Because the meaning is still there, it is just resting squarely on your shoulders now.
Precisely. And the text introduces a really powerful concept here, becoming an amin,
An amin.
which translates to a custodian or a trustee. Processing grief through post-traumatic growth requires you to consciously decide to become the amin of your benefactor's legacy.
So you extract their principles.
Right, their dedication, their ethics, their vision. You realize those elements are immune to physical death. And by embodying those principles yourself, you keep the essence of the mentor alive and functioning in the world.
So if that is how a healthy mind processes the loss of a mentor, I can't help but wonder what happens when this dynamic scales up.
The macro level.
Right. What does a whole society look like if it fails to grasp this? What happens when an entire culture actively disrespects its benefactors or forgets to act as a custodian for its foundational figures?
It is a recipe for cultural decay. And the author issues a very stark warning about it.
Let's get into that.
We just mapped out how an individual falls into nihilism. Now, apply that to a macro level. A society that mocks its mentors, that trivializes the sacrifices of its historical leaders or discards its elders, that society actively engineers a generation plagued by distrust and purposelessness.
Because younger generations are incredibly observant.
They see everything.
They are watching how the culture treats the people who built it. If they see that a visionary teacher is impoverished or a lifelong civil servant is treated as a joke, they are going to do the math.
And the math tells them that principles don't pay out.
Exactly. They will logically deduce that if society doesn't reward or honor the people who embody its best values, then those values are a bad investment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains a significant portion of the cynicism we see in modern society today.
That pervasive sense of irony and detachment.
Right, because if the overarching cultural narrative is that sacrifice goes unrewarded and benefactors are quickly forgotten, the youth will adopt a mindset of extreme self-preservation.
They will ask, why should I dedicate my life to the betterment of my community if it ultimately means nothing?
And then the overarching moral framework of the society begins to dismantle itself. Nobody believes the mission is worth inheriting.
It creates an environment where everyone is just looking out for themselves because the concept of a shared legacy has been totally trashed. If the heroes of a culture are treated as fools for trying, no one is going to volunteer to be the next hero.
Which is why the author argues that honoring benefactors isn't just about politeness. It's not just good manners.
It's survival.
It is a critical survival mechanism for any civilization. A healthy society actively engineers the transfer of character and ideals from one generation to the next.
Through cultural norms, education.
Narratives that elevate the principles those benefactors stood for, ensuring the baton is continuously passed forward.
It is about maintaining the momentum of those principles, rather than letting them hit the ground and shatter.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the ultimate thesis that the author leaves us with. And we really want to distill this for you, the listener, right now. Separation is an unavoidable tax on human relationships.
You cannot escape it.
You cannot live a full life without eventually losing the people who helped construct your worldview.
That is the immovable reality of existence. The only variable is your response to it.
Right.
If you interpret the loss of your mentors purely as a deduction from your life ledger, as something being unfairly stripped away from you, you will cultivate weakness.
You will drift toward resentment.
You risk falling into the very real trap of nihilism we discussed.
But there is a secondary option. If you view their departure not as a theft, but as the final rigorous lesson of their curriculum.
I love that phrasing.
If you view it as the moment you are called to step up and bear the weight of responsibility, the trauma becomes the exact catalyst that makes you resilient.
Truly, great humans achieve a form of practical immortality. Their physical bodies fail, sure, but their character, their methodologies, their thoughts, they take root in the minds of the people they invested in.
The physical benefactor steps off the stage, but their ideological blueprint continues to build the future.
And that leads to a direct challenge for you, based on the author's final dichotomy. When a foundational figure leaves your life, you are presented with two distinct paths. You can choose to be a memorial.
A memorial is static. It is a living monument to sadness, constantly looking backward at a time when things were whole, defined entirely by what it has lost.
Or you can choose to be an amin, a custodian.
And a custodian is dynamic. It implies active management. A custodian doesn't just sit in the empty room and mourn the architect. A custodian takes the architect's blueprints and continues building the city.
It is the difference between warning an extinguished fire and using the remaining embers to ignite a new one.
So, what does this all mean for you? It means you have profound agency in the face of absolute loss. You don't have to be a passive casualty of an existential crisis. You have the capacity to be the architect of your own post-traumatic growth.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, this raises an important question. And it is a completely different angle for you to consider long after this audio stops playing.
Let's hear it.
We have spent this entire time analyzing how you process the loss of the foundational pillars in your life. We have focused on your view, looking up at the people who shaped you.
Right.
But consider the reverse. To someone else in your life right now, perhaps a child, a junior colleague you are mentoring, a younger sibling, or a friend who leans on your judgment. You are that foundational pillar.
Wow. You are the anchor in their cognitive mapping.
Exactly.
That is a staggering perspective shift. It means you are currently constructing the load-bearing walls for someone else's mind.
You are. So the question you must ask yourself is, what invisible legacy are you building within them? What specific enduring principles are you unknowingly teaching them to rely on?
Because one day, inevitably, your time will come to step off the stage.
And they will face the acute shock of losing you. Are you tying them solely to your personality, which will leave them in a vacuum? Or are you actively equipping them with principles that will survive your absence?
How you choose to live today and the values you choose to embody will dictate whether they eventually collapse into nihilism or whether they have the strength to proudly pick up your baton.
That is an incredibly powerful thought to carry with you. Thank you for spending your time with us on this deep dive. Take care of yourselves and take a closer look at what you are building in the people looking up to you.